Welcome back to the channel, guys and girls. Welcome back. Today I want to do an informative video for you guys all about my favorite technique here at the trout stream. As you guys probably already know, that would be drift fishing. I want to go in depth about everything there is to know about drift fishing and how to catch fish just like I do. We're going to break down everything from the rod, the reel, the line, the bait, the presentation, the cast, all the way through. Let's go ahead and hop straight into the information parts of it. When it comes to drift fishing, guys, it is very important to use a longer rod. This rod in particular is a 6'8" Lew's mock pearl. 6'8" is about the shortest you want for drift fishing. And the reason being is the longer the rod, the more control you'll have over your overall drift. So some guys will even go as far as using 8-foot rods for drifting, especially when we're talking about steelheads and salmon. But around here in the mountains, a 6'8", 7 foot, 7'3", totally sufficient, because a lot of times our creeks are very narrow, a lot of overhanging brush, you know, to cause distraction. So you don't want to go too big. Now, when drift fishing, it's very important to use fluorocarbon line. One, fluorocarbon line is invisible, but not only that, it is very dense. It will help you drift your bait. It'll help your bait sink more swiftly to the bottom and stay closer to your bobber overall. So fluorocarbon is a must. The lighter the line you can get away with, the better drift you will have, simply because your bait and bobber will be a lot closer together. The current won't have as much control over your bait using a thinner line. However, I do prefer to use 6 or 8 pound. 8 pound is my go-to. In today's video, we're using 6 pound SOS trout magnet line. I like a heavier line just because I fish for larger fish. Line is totally up to you. Now, when it comes to drift fishing, it's very important to have the right setup on the end of your rod. I prefer a trout magnet float. I really like these floats because they're extremely lightweight. When the fish takes, there's very little resistance for the fish to recognize that he's been hooked or has bitten something that's not natural. So not very much drag on this. This thing floats really good down the stream. The top seems to stay up. They're really visible. They paint them up really brightly, but the bobber is your choice. You can use any bobber you prefer. Now, when it comes to the business end, there are hundreds of options you can use for drift fishing. But my overall favorite is just a tiny little salmon egg hook here. This is, I think, a size 8. And then you add your B size weights. Now, when drift fishing, the swifter the current, the more weight you may need. As a rule of thumb, 6 inches is as close as you ever need to get. And if you need to add extra weight while drift fishing, make sure you separate your weights about 4 to 6 inches. So if you need 2, you'd put your second one here. If you needed 3, you'd put it about there. So let's hop right into baits. Now, when drifting, you can use a plethora of baits, from artificials to natural baits, bugs that you find, night crawlers, minnows, what have you. However, generally speaking, when you're drift fishing, you are trying to replicate something that is dead and simply drifting down the river, or something like a bug or a fish egg. So essentially, what I like to do when drift fishing is I like to drift eggs. Now, if we're talking about brands of eggs, my go-to is Potski Bait Company. They have an entire alignment of baits that you can use for drifting. All kinds of different eggs, sizes, colors, dyed up differently, scented, what have you. This is my go-to. Now, the reason I really like to use eggs while drifting, for trout in particular, is because when trout are in the streams naturally, they are releasing eggs during their spawn, and the eggs are often rolling down the creek along the bottom. So using something like this is just the most natural bait you can use while drifting. So without any further ado, we're going to get a couple of these Potski Yellow Jacket balls of fire on, and we're going to get it. We're going to start drifting, and as we fish, I'm going to break down what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and we'll go from there. But stay tuned, stick around. Let's go ahead and hop in here and let's get started. All right, we've put ourselves 3 eggs on our hook here. We've still got our weight. Now, whenever you walk up to a spot that you want to drift, just simply look from upstream to downstream. About 20 yards upstream, 20 yards downstream is about the area you'll be covering from the position you're standing in. And then kind of judge how deep you think the bottom is in the deepest spot where you think the fish will be hanging out at. And then simply adjust the distance from your bait to your float to match the depth that you think is going on. Now it's okay to overshoot just a little bit, and what you'll notice is as you're drifting, your bobber will bounce up and down and kind of go under the water. Now what that's going to insinuate is that your weight or your bait is hitting the bottom. So that would mean to move this closer until you find that perfect sweet spot where you're not hitting the bottom, you're not dragging, and the bait is right in the fish's face. Now when you find this sweet spot, you'll be able to tell because you're simply going to catch a fish. So I think where I'm looking at here, that this separation, about 2 foot, is what we're looking at from our bobber to our bait. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to cast upstream, and we're going to allow our bobber to float downstream, keeping track with our slack, trying to keep our slack perfectly straight with our, we got a bite on our very first cast there, I jerked it away, but we're going to try to keep our slack as tight as we can to keep our bobber perfectly in line with the tip of our rod. So let's grab us out a few more eggs here. Right, so we've got our eggs here. We figured out our separation from our bobber to our bait. So we're going to cast it out here. We're going to allow this to drift downstream, keeping a close contact with our bait, not allowing any slack to lay against the water. And we're just simply going to let that drift right on just past us. And after it gets so far, we'll just simply reel it back up. There's one. Tiny little guy. I believe we've got ourselves a tiny little wild trout here. That's exactly what we've got. Have a look here. While drifting, you can fool even the wisest of fish. This is a natural little native rainbow trout here. A beautiful little specimen there while drifting. Let's allow her just to take right on off. Heck yeah. We got one on it. There's one. Just casted it upstream. We was letting it drift back by. Ooh, she's a fighter. Yes, she is a fighter. Let's see if we can fight her right on over here, boys and girls, to an area that we can net her. Reach down, scoop her up in the net. Perfect. Alright guys, here's another beautiful drifting specimen. Just going to simply take our pliers here, pinch at the shank, turn the hook out, and there we go. We just casted it upstream, kept very close contact with our float. We left absolutely no slack in the line. That kept our drift perfectly in speed with the current, and this little girl could not help it. Let's go ahead and let her go. There she goes. All right, we rigged ourselves up 4 eggs. We're going to make a similar cast. We're just going to cast it upstream. We're going to keep our rod tip high. We're going to keep close. There's one. This is another wild trout. We are catching wild trout in this creek today, guys. This is awesome. A beautiful little wild trout here. Let's go on ahead and grab our net here. Beautiful little wild trout fighting over there. All right, for those of you guys that are concerned, the net is still moist from our last fish. It has literally been one drift. So we're just going to pop our little wild, beautiful little rainbow here right on into the net. See if we can get a hold of her bottom lip here. Actually, I'm thinking let's go on ahead. Let's pinch this bait here. this hook here. Let's turn it out that way. There we go. That was much easier. And yet again, another little beautiful, gorgeous, wild Virginia rainbow trout. These eggs work on all fish, wild, stocked, it does not matter. Let's let this little beauty right here go. We do not want to keep her out of the water any longer than we have to. There she goes. She swam right out of the net, back out there to grow and produce more wild fish for myself and you to come and enjoy. In certain situations while drifting, if you find an area like this where there's clean cut bank, you can actually walk beside your float and get an elongated drift by simply following your bait as it goes downstream, just like we're doing here. And that will enable you to cover a good bit more water.